This is a 2004 Z06. What I'm doing is I'm replacing the harmonic balancer, even though after I've gotten this off, there's really nothing wrong with it. However, it's very common for these to fail. There's an inner hub and an outer shell that's connected by a rubber sleeve, and the rubber sleeve apparently will come delaminated, and this outer shell will either walk forward and slam into the power steering rack or walk back and mess up your timing chain cover. So I'm replacing it before the thing goes bad and lets me down. And apparently this has been a problem with a lot of these LS engines. This is an LS, an LS6 in this one, but it's also a problem with all the C5s and all the C6 Corvettes. So that's what I'm doing. Now, if you go to YouTube and you Google C5 harmonic balancer replacement, there's a number of videos on that. I like the one that a guy named Froggy made. He walks us through this, and he does a really good job. And I deviated a little bit from what he did. And I like to think of this video I'm going to make as kind of a supplement to his work. But if you want to do this job, you really got to look at Froggy's video on this, because it's really pretty explanatory. So this is the harmonic balancer I'm replacing it with. This is a beautifully, I used to be a machinist, and this is a beautifully machined and manufactured finished piece of equipment. And they're actually rebuildable. They recommend that you can rebuild these after every engine overhaul if you're racing it, or every 10 years. But this harmonic balancer is not going to fail. And here's what it is if you want to get the number on there. It's an ATI 917266. And this is the one that replaces the original. It's the same diameter and the same distance here, all the same measurements, that you don't have to modify anything. It goes right on, it's the same belt, the same idler pulleys, the same tensioner. You don't have to do it. It's a complete clean retrofit without having to do anything else. And that's why I chose it. I got this online, and it cost me about $380 or so. Summit Racing has them. You can get them from there. I think they're about $400. A number of these people have them, but I'm really hopeful that this is going to work out for me. So now, as far as deviating from what Froggy did, here's the first thing. As you noticed, I have a lift, okay? And pretty obvious why a lift is a bit more at least convenient, but it's also a lot safer. I'm not risking my life to crawl under a car. I was working on my Suburban over the summer, and I had it up on two safety stands, and I was jacking up on the lower control arm. I had the wheels off the car, and the thing came off the jacks on me, goes slamming down. If I had been under that car at the time, I wouldn't be making this video right now. Now, another thing that I've done here that Froggy didn't do is a lot of these guys will chock the wheels, and they'll put it in 6th gear to try to lock the crankshaft of the engine up. Well, I don't think it's positive enough, okay? I want something that's gonna lock the engine up tight where it doesn't move 1 inch. So here's what I've done. I've had to take this tool here, you can see it, and I'll give you the number for it. It's this tool right up here that takes the place of the starter, and there's 3 teeth that engage the starter ring. When you bolt that thing up there, those teeth mesh in there absolutely perfectly. This crankshaft is not going to move 1 bit. And in order to get that crankshaft bolt loose and to tighten the new one, you really need that. The downside is you got to pull the exhaust off and you got to pull the starter off. Now, the exhaust of this car, I can have it off in 15 minutes. But if you're going to run into trouble, this is where you're going to run into trouble. These bolts could be a bugger to get off if they get rusted. And what you got to do is you just got to gently work on them. You got to take a wire brush and wire brush around here, hit it with some penetrating oil, wait a little bit, hit it with some never sees, and back these. Don't use an impact wrench, because if you do, you're probably going to snap with these studs off. you can feel if a bolt's binding up with just a regular ratchet or a breaker bar. If you snap one of these studs off, you're probably going to end up pulling the exhaust manifold off, which that could be a nightmare, especially if the bolts that hold the exhaust manifold to the head are frozen. You snap one of those off, you're pulling the heads then. Okay? Don't let yourself get in that position. Just gently and carefully and patiently work these nuts back and forth. Wire brush them, penetrating oil, never cease. If you have to, you can hit them with a little bit of heat. I just have a little, I don't have an oxyacetylene rig, which would be very nice because you can get these things very hot. I just have a, well, let me show you what I have. It's right over here. This is MAP. I think that stands for methane acetylene propane. And it burns a bit hotter than just regular propane. And it's for what I'm using it for, it gets the bolt plenty hot, or the nut plenty hot. If you're gonna get the heat to this thing, only apply it, if you can, to the nut. Try not to let the stud heat up too much, okay? If you heat it up, if you need to heat it up, it's probably gonna break loose. So that's my secret about the exhaust. Everything else is really pretty straightforward. Easy to work on. Okay, so let's see what else I'd like to talk to you about. Pulling the power steering rack out, it's a bit of a chore, but for me it went very, very smoothly. If you look at what Froggy did, he did a pretty good job of explaining how to take this thing out. One thing that I would like to point out to you is there's often a lot of grit and grease oil around this area here. So before you break the flare nuts loose here, okay, you want to get a screwdriver, a toothbrush, and maybe some mineral spirits, and clean this off really, really well, because you don't want any of that grit getting into your power steering unit when you break the flare nuts loose. And speaking of breaking the flare nuts loose, these flare nuts, you know, you've got to be gentle with them. If you don't use the right tool and they're really tight, you can crush them, okay? This actually is the proper tool to use. This is an, let me see here, I think it's 18 millimeters. This is an 18 millimeter flare nut crow's foot. And I have a whole set of them here. I'll never use all these. If I wanted to buy these, I would just buy them as I need them. You probably only buy 3 or 4 of them in your whole lifetime. These are Snap-on. They're ridiculously expensive. And as I mentioned, I'll probably never use half of them. So, and then what I did is before I pulled the rack out, I took a piece of duct tape. Made sure it was clean and dry. Took a piece of duct tape and duct taped the ports to this thing here. So there's no grit that's going to get inside there. Then I took the rack out and cleaned the whole thing up real nice. Got it all nice and clean. It's ready to go back in. Okay, so where were we here? Assembling the ATI, the ATI Super Damper. This is not a regular Torx. This is a Torx Plus. Don't use a Torx T40 on this. Use a TP40, Torx Plus 40. If you use regular Torx here, chances are you're going to strip out the heads of these things. They're going to be, you know, a lot of trouble. You got to Loctite these in. There's a couple places on the internet or on Google, on YouTube, where they show you how to assemble these. I'm not going to go into detail, but just this is a tool I got at Napa. I think it was like $6. You know, it's not worth the risk of stripping that thing out. So don't do it. Don't even try it. This is an ATP bolt. This is actually the original one. This is one of these torque to yield bolts that you can only use once, and I'm sure you know what that is. I'm not going to go into that. This is I have a number right here. This is an ARP 234-2503 bolt. This is not a torque to yield. You can reuse this bolt, but you've got to torque the thing down to, I think, about 240 foot-pounds. That's why it's essential that you have the crankshaft locked as tight as you can get. And as I mentioned, that tool works very well. That little tool, by the way, is made by, you can get it on eBay. It's made by MAF. It costs about, I've seen them for as low as 20 bucks. You know, I think I might have paid 25 for this one. I believe this is a GM part number, but if you go on YouTube, or not YouTube, but Google this, or on eBay, I should say. Go on eBay and search for this number, KJ42386-A LS. That's just the LS engine. You can order that part, and I highly recommend you use that rather than just try, blocking the wheels and putting the emergency brake on and put it in 6th gear. I don't think that's a really positive way to break these things loose. And this bolt here, this was really tight. I had to really muscle that. And here's what I used to get the bolt loose, the crankshaft bolt loose. Come on over here and I'll show you where the harmonic balancer was and how I got the thing off. You really don't need to apply heat. What you want here is this is a 15/16 socket. I believe this is actually a metric bolt. However, the 15/16 fits nice and snug on there. Very, very little play. I wouldn't worry about using this. I would probably prefer to use a 6-point, but the 12-point worked. I got this extension here, 15/16. I got this out here like this, and I had to put this piece of water pipe on the end of the breaker bar to break this thing loose. And I held it here straight with my hand so it didn't walk off either way. And I just pulled like crazy on this thing, and all of a sudden, snap! I thought, oh my God, I probably cracked the socket. The socket probably cracked on me. I was putting so much force on it, but it didn't. It didn't. The bolt broke loose. Lucky for me, the bolt broke loose. Now, let me talk to you about taking the harmonic balancer off of there. You got the bolt off. This is the puller that I had to use, and it's a little bit light for the job. I tried to put the next size puller on there, which I think is a 5-ton. It wouldn't get on here. It just wasn't the right size. It wasn't configured, but this is configured to fit on there. And at first when I started cranking the thing down, oh, by the way, what I did is I had to get a little bit creative about, I used a socket, whatever this is here. This is a 1-inch socket. It fits right on the end, nicely on the end of the crankshaft here. You do not want to damage the internal threads of this crankshaft or the out. You don't want to nick anything up. You want to be very careful not to damage this. If you damage that crankshaft, you're pulling the engine out. You don't want to do that. So just be careful. So this is what I had to do. Naturally, this little end here is going to disappear into the hole of the socket. So I just found this in my washer drawer, and it was just right. So now this will go against there and push against the socket, pull against the balancer and pull it off. What I did is I actually took this mounting tape and mounted it to this thing. So it was just one less piece I had to kind of like manipulate in there. It was one solid piece. Instead of trying, you have to be an octopus to get this thing in correctly. So when I got this thing all set up, took me a few minutes to get it all set up. I started pulling on it with just a regular ratchet, and I got to the point where it didn't feel like it was going to come at all. It felt like I was going to maybe strip these threads out or break this little puller. So I stopped, and what I did is I heated the balancer up. I heated here, here, and here. So what do? You don't have to get things, this is super hot. What I did, I set it here for about 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 seconds. I did this for about a minute until it got too hot to touch, but not nearly red hot, nothing like that. And I cranked on that, got my wrench back on this, and it pulled right off. No trouble whatsoever. So that'll be hopefully help for you if you have trouble getting this out. A little bit of heat here, here, and here. Just the right amount of heat applied, just the right spot will pull that balancer right off of there. Okay, I also am going to replace, in fact I have it out right now. If you look here, I have the front seal out. I pulled that out. I use this handy dandy seal puller. It pulls out really easy. Be careful not to let this tool nick here or here. Be careful not to nick these. Make sure you just have a hold of the seal itself and nothing else. It pulls right out very easily. Here's the new seal. It is a National 100470. And I think if it goes in as easy as the old one came out, it's gonna be pretty easy, pretty much of a breeze. In fact, so far that I've gotten with this car, it's been pretty easy. I haven't had any trouble at all. There's a couple little snags that I worked around, but all in all, if you look at Froggy's video, which I highly recommend, I'm not going to repeat everything that he did. I'm just, as I mentioned, just going to do a supplement. So let me show you a couple other things that I did. Okay, I'm going to let the car down now, and I'm going to show you how to do some of the work up top. That helps. Some of the little things I did a little bit differently that for me seem to work pretty well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look around the perimeter, make sure I'm not leaving anything under here like a ladder or anything. Walk around the perimeter of the lift. I'm going to look at the checklist, lowering, walk around the perimeter, lower. I got to pull the safety latch back and just lower it down. Again, whenever you push this button and raise the thing, you got to think, did I leave the hood up? Did I leave the trunk up? Did I forget to retract the power antenna? Anything that you've done in the car that's going to bottom out on the ceiling. You got to really be careful of this or you're going to damage your car. This thing has a built-in safety latch system that if the cable were to break, it automatically locks, mechanically locks. There's a pawl that goes into these square fittings here, and doesn't allow the lift to come down in there. Here's the exhaust. You got to pull the sway bar off. The sway bar, very easy to pull off. And I'll show you what I have to do here to make the job easier for me anyhow. You got to pull the alternator out. This is a really easy alternator to pull out. Plug the hot lead, 2 bolts, and the alternator comes right out. Easiest alternator I've ever gotten out of a car. In fact, this car really is, I've had no trouble working on this car or even that car over there. That's a 4th generation Corvette. They're really easy to work on. Everybody says, oh, Corvette's really hard to work on. I haven't found it. I found they're just a breeze. So anyhow, this is part of the anti-lock brake system, and I've loosened up the bracket. What Froggy did is he jacked the thing up, and you'll see on his video how he did that. I found it really wasn't necessary. But if you look down here, right down in here, see if I can't get my hand in there. This is a U-bolt, a U-clip that fitting that clips onto the end of the steering gear input shaft. Okay? So what you want to do is before you got to pull when you pull the alternator, make sure you disconnect the battery. Always disconnect the ground. Pull the alternator out. Go inside the car or reconnect the battery. Make sure this isn't touching anything because it's hot. Go in the car, turn the ignition on, and turn the steering wheel until this bolt in that little bracket, point to it right there, this bolt here, it's a 1/2-inch bolt, and that bracket is facing up where you can get a 1/2-inch socket on there. And I use a 1/2-inch drive because the bolt is really, really tight. They put it in with Loctite, so it takes a bit of pressure to get that bolt loosened out of there. But it does come out. Once you get it out, once you get the bolt out, pull the bolt out completely. Make sure you do that. Don't leave the bolt in because you won't get it loose. This will slide off. Right here. This will slide off the power steering rack input shaft. It slides right off like that. You slide it off and just get it out of the way. It slides off to the driver's side of the car. Okay? Once you slide it off, make sure that your steering column is locked because you don't want to get the steering column out of sync with the input shaft of the power steering rack. They got to go back the way they came out. So your steering, you don't really have to rope the thing down or use any fancy connections because when you pull the ignition key out of the ignition, the steering column locks anyhow. So nothing's going to turn that steering wheel. Okay? Also, as far as the power steering input shaft is concerned, over here, I just took a magic marker and marked the stripes with it just so I knew what was up. Thinking that maybe this is going to be really easy to turn and it could get out of sync, it could turn on me. No, it doesn't turn. It's not going to turn. Okay? So when you go putting this thing back together, you're not going to have any guesswork or have to mess around getting these things to couple up again. Okay? Now, once you get that steering thing undone, you've got to do everything that Froggy says, unbolt. And as far as these flare nuts are concerned, the upper one, I think, comes from the pump. It's the line that goes kind of facing back to the back of the car. This line here goes to the power steering cooler. So this one you can get very, very easily from the top of the car. And this one you can get very, very easily kind of through the wheel well of the car without any trouble at all. Disconnect the lead. Okay. So we're kind of moving along here. Let's keep going. I'm going to lift the car up again. And what I'm going to do is make sure the hood is closed. Oh, I want to show you something here before I put the car back up again. Once I get the power steering rack unbolted, and Froggy will show you how to do that. As I mentioned, I really didn't have to lift this thing up out of the way like he does. But you'll see down here, these brake lines right here. That's the only obstacle you've got to get the input shaft of the power steering around. So what you'll do is you'll lift up on the power steering rack and pull it out of its little cradle and shove it forward. Okay? Once you do that, you can maneuver it towards the driver's side of the car a little bit, and you just kind of gently walk these lines around that power steering input shaft of the power steering rack. You can do that. You don't have to worry about mangling these lines here or kinking them because you can just get them around. And I found that if you don't jack this thing up, it makes it a little bit easier. You have a little bit more play to maneuver those little lines, these brake lines. I didn't want to disconnect these. I thought I was going to open a big can of worms if I did that. As it turned out, you don't have to disconnect these lines here. You don't have to raise this thing up. I did it without any trouble. I maneuvered the input shaft of the power steering rack around these by pulling the rack up, shoving it towards the front of the car, and getting around that obstacle, just with a little bit of finesse. Now there's one other obstacle that you got to overcome in order to get that power steering rack down. I'll show you what that is. I'm going to have to lift the car back up. I'm going to definitely not forget to put the hood down, or else I'll be buying a new. By the way, this is a carbon fiber hood. I was very difficult upon kind of replacing that thing. even if I could find one. Okay, lifting, move ramps, retract power antenna, moderate height limit arrows, lower to engage safety locks. Okay, so now I'm going to raise the car up. Again, I walk around the car, make sure there's nothing that's going to be in the way. Raise the car up. Okay, we're still working on getting the power steering rack. This is long before, of course, we have access to the harmonic balancer. So we're still trying to get the power steering rack out. And I'll show you what you got to do. If you look at the power steering rack, there's a little bit that this is from here to here. You can't get it out unless you lower this cross member. You might want to call it the engine cradle. You got to lower this thing a little bit. You see these blocks of wood? These blocks of wood aren't going to be there when you lower the engine cradle. You're just going to have it on the stands there, on the jacks there. This isn't going to be. These aren't going to be supporting any of the weight. We're going to use this later. Okay. So now we have 4 bolts that have to be loosened to lower the engine cradle, or you may call it the cross member, and you don't have to lower it very much. So what you do is there's one on the other side, and you come back here. There's 3 and 4. 4 of those bolts you gotta loosen. And don't worry about loosening them too much. What I do is I loosen them until I just can't see the thread anymore. There's an unthreaded shank right here on the bolt. Just unthread the nut until you can't see. That gives you plenty of room. And actually, what holds the thing up, I believe, is going to hold it up and keep it from coming down, is actually the leaf spring. So don't worry about the blocks not being there and the engine cradle falling out. It's not going to happen. In fact, you got to force the engine cradle down. And this is what I used. I cut these little wedges. And by the way, these 4 bolts for the engine, lower them down evenly. Don't crank one all the way loose and then the other one loose. A little bit at a time. All 4 corners, a little bit at a time. Then, again, a little bit at a time on all 4 corners. Come over here and I'll show you this over here. Can you see that wedge there? I think you have to come around the side here. You see the distance there? It's somewhere between 3/8 of an inch and 1/2 inch. That's really all the lower you have to make this thing in order to get that power steering rack to clear between here and here. You need that 3/8 of an inch. That's all you really need. Once you do that, I have got these wedges in all 4 corners. You tap them in evenly, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit, go round, 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 until you have about that much distance. It's probably about 3/8 of an inch. It gives you just enough clearance to get that power steering rack out. Once you've done that, and maneuvering these back out of that power steering gear, the rack comes right out without any difficulty whatsoever. Okay? And again, Froggy will show you how to do that. But I didn't have to pry on anything. I didn't have to force anything. It came right out without any trouble at all. So far, this job's been kind of a breeze. Okay, now, what's the wood for? Well, what I did is, when I started reefing on this thing with the water pipe here to loosen up the crankshaft bolt, when I was loosening up the crankshaft bolt, I had that big breaker bar and had a water pipe on there. I started to pull it. It felt like the car was going to slide off the jacks. It may have done that. So what I did is I put this wood in here, spacers, and I lowered it down on top of the engine oil pan. The oil pan down to where the oil pan is not taking nearly all the weight. The jacks are still taking most of the weight. I lowered it down until I just couldn't move these blocks anymore. if it's too little weight on the, if there's not enough weight on the blocks, you can move this piece of wood. I did it to where I just can't move the wood. It's locked up tight, and that stabilized everything and kept the car from rocking when I pulled this thing. This thing's really tight. You'll be surprised. And it's going to prevent you from knocking the car off these jacks. Okay? So that's the reason for the blocks. But don't have the blocks under there when you're trying to lower the engine cradle, because you're not going to be able to do that. And as I mentioned, if you look at the geometry here, I think what this is I think what's really preventing why you need the blocks at the wedges in the first place, because I think you're fighting the leaf spring here. It looks to me like the leaf spring is what's going to hold up this engine cradle, even without the bolts. The bolts are loose. And even without the wood in there, that engine cradle doesn't come down any farther by itself. You've got to force them down with those wedges. Okay, we're moving right along here. What's next? I want to show you something here that, you know, one of the reasons I work on my cars, I don't trust anybody else working on this car. Froggy will agree. He does all his own work too. If you take your car to even a Chevy dealer, this is what you're supposed to use to jack the car up. This is a puck that fits up. You probably already know this. I bought 4 of these, and I really like this particular one because they fit nicely and they're nicely made. I bought 4 of them. I keep them in the car with me. There's 4 of them. I'm using 2 of them over there. And this is made by, it's called Reverse Logic. And they're from, I think, Souderton, Pennsylvania. The reason I know that, I used to live really close to there. In Souderton, Pennsylvania. He has a little machine shop, he makes these things. It's for C5, C6, C7. I keep a set of these in the car, okay? So, yeah, you'll get some monkey who'll just throw the lift pads under the car and just jack it anywhere. And then you got a mess. You've got cracked fiberglass, you've got the floorboards to be stove in, you know, don't let them do that. And I've even seen Chevy dealers who don't jack it up properly. The pucks are in here. One on each side. You can see one on the other side. Don't jack your car up without those things. You'll crack the fiberglass around here. Okay, so now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to install this onto the crankshaft pulley. That's the next step. And it's recommended that you heat this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take our toaster oven and put it out here. I'm going to heat it probably about between 200 and 220 degrees. And I know that's not enough heat to damage like the rubber O-rings in this thing, because this dampener probably gets to be that temperature when the engine's running anyhow. These engines run at 200 degrees. So if I get this thing at 200 degrees, it's probably gonna be just enough to get this thing started on there. And we'll save that for tomorrow. And I'll show you how I made it. But so far, everything has been really straightforward, and I've had no trouble so far with this, and I don't expect any trouble. There you have it.